Welcome to the EVMS Podcast. I am your host, Karlo Menoscal. Today is a very special episode. Today's episode is personal. I'm joined by someone who isn't just a colleague, not just a fellow program manager, not just a fellow veteran, but a brother. I met Jason Sharp in 2018 while we were both supporting Honeywell Federal Manufacturing and Technologies at the NNSA Kansas City National Security Campus, working on one of the most complex and consequential missions this country undertakes, nuclear weapons modernization. In an environment where pressure is constant, stakes are real, and credibility is earned daily, you learn very quickly who people truly are. Jason stood out immediately. Over time, that professional respect turned into a deep friendship, one built on shared values, hard conversations, and mutual trust. Jason wasn't just present for professional milestones, he stood with me in life as well, attending my Catholic wedding back in 2022. That tells you how close this relationship is. Professionally, Jason is the kind of leader that you want beside you when the mission is difficult and the margin for error is thin. He's a senior program manager at Leonardo DRS, an Army Ranger, and a trusted leader on high risk, high visibility programs across the Department of Defense and nuclear weapons enterprise. But titles don't define Jason Sharp. Jason is an entrepreneur, an author, a husband, a father. He grew up on the south side of Chicago in an environment that demanded resilience early in life. That path carried him through the sustained grind of Army Ranger School, a relentless test of leadership, endurance, and decision making under exhaustion, into complex national security programs, and eventually into a fight he never volunteered for, cancer. In his book, Learning to Suffer, Eyes Wide Open, Jason doesn't offer slogans or surface level motivation. He offers lived experience. The book explores what suffering reveals, what it strips away, and how it reshapes leadership, faith, and purpose when the strength alone is no longer enough. Jason doesn't speak from theory, he speaks from scars. Today's conversation will span Jason's life story, his professional journey across the Department of Defense and nuclear weapons, and the leadership lessons forged under pressure, lessons that matter not just in combat or national security, but in business, family, and life. What makes this episode different is that I know the man behind the resume and the book. Jason is the same person in private that he is in leadership roles. Disciplined, honest, reflective, and deeply committed to serving others. It's an honor to welcome my dear friend and brother, Jason Sharp. How are you, Jason?
I'm having a great day, Carlo. It's really good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's been a few years. Like 3 years, I think, the last time we saw each other, something like that.
In person, at
And
least. Yeah.
a lot has happened since then. We both have gone through different ventures of our career. You wrote a book, that was very amazing. By the way, please go out and check out Jason's book, Eyes Wide Open, Learning to Suffer. It's a real heartfelt written book and very transformative. The message is very clear. We see day in and day out how people struggle with difficulties ranging from mild to very severe. And I think that people will greatly learn from what you have shown us through this book and the words that you have to say here today. I'd like to jump in and ask a little bit about your early life and formations. You grew up in a tough environment. What early experiences most shaped how you saw the world back then?
Yeah, I did say grew up in a tough environment. It's probably an understatement. My father spent most of my young life in prison, and we grew up on the streets. We literally grew up eating out of dumpsters and living in homeless shelters and you know, fighting for our lives. You know, when your mom goes missing for weeks on end and you're running from house to house trying to avoid DCFS, the Children and Family Services, keeping your younger brother fed, those kinds of things, they take a toll. But what I would say with your question, the early experiences, I look back now, right? Hindsight, it's um, certainly something to talk about. I look back now and I realize that there's unlimited proverbial walls that are put up around you naturally, and I think that the world kind of exists to keep those there for you. And I realized that um, you know having to look past those proverbial walls in order to see what's really out there was something that I needed to do early on. Just trying to take care of my family, trying to avoid the system, trying to stay out of system's hands, if you will, was probably among the hardest things that we did. We didn't grow up with heat. We didn't grow up with health insurance. We didn't grow up with any of that. And it was always challenging. Again, the proverbial walls were there. And you know, I don't know what it was. I think maybe we'll talk about it downstream here in this conversation. But I found a way to look past those proverbial walls and survive. And I did that, with my older sister at the time. And at the time we were taking care of my younger brother, Jesse, because nobody else was around. So it was a very tough time watching my mom getting beat up on the streets, getting arrested in front of us constantly being taken from homes, constantly running and asking people if we could stay with them to avoid being taken in or taken by the police. Those are some of the core memories that shaped my survival mindset, if you will.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. Definitely a gut wrenching experience. I can't imagine going through anything like that. Although we have some sort of parallel similarities, nothing compares to having to eat out of dumpsters. And I think that gives life a very different meaning. So, growing up, Jason, what did strength mean to you before leadership or service entered the picture?
That's a great question. At the time, it was about being able to provide for my younger brother Jesse and stay focused in terms of not allowing my brother Jesse and my sister Jody at the time to uh, be taken away. And I was doing things that nobody wants to do. I was standing outside of ATMs asking for money. I was 11 years old, 10 years old doing these things. I was stealing from the gas stations, trying to, just get some milk. I wasn't stealing candy bars or, I was just trying to make sure my baby brother was fed. And when I think about strength, it was literally surviving and not giving up. Because that meant that we were going to end up in some sort of system's hands, and that's really where I didn't want us to be, because I knew we could pull it off. I knew that my sister and I could survive, and we did.
And you did, right? You stayed completely out of the system, correct?
Yeah, we did.
Well, great for your family. Reading through your book, I know that that was a very difficult situation. Thank God, ended up on the other side and doing very well. Looking back now, what part of your early life demanded resilience before you even knew what the word meant?
Yeah, I live by that word now, and of course, you and I both do. When I look back, I look back at our relationship with our mother and my sister. Probably one of the most traumatic experiences she ever had was one period of time my mother went missing. She was gone. And at this point, it's usually 3 or 4 days, maybe a week and a half. And this time we were coming up on 2 weeks, and we were getting very worried. And okay, we're coming into the third week, and my sister finally, we said, look, we need to go look for her, because they're going to come knocking on our door. rent's due, we're missing school, people are going to come asking questions. And I didn't, I wanted to go and look for my mother myself, but my sister says, I'm older, I'm going to do it. You stay here and take care of Jesse. And of course, I caved. I listened to her. She was older at the time, and so she ventures out, and she comes, she comes upon my mom, um, basically naked behind a dumpster over on Diversey and Milwaukee area in Chicago. And I remember when she couldn't get my mom to move, so she had to come home. There's nothing that she could do. And I remember my sister coming home, and I mean, she just was frozen, very pale, very just different person, completely different person after having seen that. And I couldn't pull it out of her for the longest time. I couldn't even get her to explain to me what had happened. And, as I revisit that experience, that's just one time of many different times of that happening. And I remember, talking with my sister repeatedly, and the conversation was about not giving up on our mother, and doing our best to understand that the circumstances are what they are, uh, and you know she really was doing her best to try to take care of us, help us survive, give us the skills we needed to survive. And that was probably, I look back, uh, from the very definition of that word resilience. um, I look back at that experience and those experiences, and constantly reminding myself and my sister that we're not giving up on her and us, for that matter, right? So that's really where probably where it started for me.
One of the things that I truly admire from you is the way you speak about your parents, your father, and particularly your mother. Someone that came from a similar experience might often carry lifelong resentment with them, but you never gave up on your parents, and that's highly admirable from you. I think that truly demonstrates who you are.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's been a very tough road to be on, because it's easy to lay blame. It's easy to point fingers and say, I I could have been light years ahead of where I am now had they, uh, you know, parented better, whatever we want to say, right? But who am I to know or judge what circumstances drove them to be in the positions that they're in? And at the end of the day, my mom, she really did give us the skills that we needed to survive, and whether it was directly or indirectly, right? Right. Being absent forced us to take care of each other, right? Being present, she really did give us some of the skills that we needed to, look, sometimes you have to go stand outside of an ATM. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And that's not something I would have ever thought of doing at that time, at that age. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I appreciate that comment, Carlo, because it has been difficult, and it is challenging to look back, and I get so many comments, and everybody's asking me to, your parents could have done better, and all these things, and I just, that's not my lane. Those circumstances are outside of my control. There's nothing I could have
Yeah.
possibly done, to try to, understand or change the circumstances that they were given at that time.
Right. I want to dive deeper into those lessons because, as you said, even indirectly, just her not being there taught some core lessons that have led you through your entire life. At what point did you realize that suffering wasn't just something to escape, but something that might shape you and who you were becoming?
Well, it's a great question. It certainly wasn't, during my adolescent years. You know, suffering, that definition. the definition I have for it now, it wasn't in my head at that time. Uh, it took me quite a while. It took me some experiences and some shared experiences with some mentors before I started to make that shift. Coming out of my adolescent years, I did consciously make that choice when I think about circumstances and what I can do with those circumstances. You know, I did actively say, hey, you know, this is a shit show, but I'm still gonna make it happen as best I can. I get asked that question a lot, and I don't have like a real answer to say, well, what triggered you to say, you know, I'm not gonna give up, or I'm gonna do better, or I'm gonna you know, I'm gonna overcome. It was sort of this innate mindset that I had no reason otherwise to do anything different except move forward, and because these are the circumstances I'm in. And there was never this feeling of, you know, I'm going to go and just sit on my ass now because I can, because everything around me sucks. It was just, it was always in my head that there is something else I could be doing. And maybe it is a survivability, you know, a survivability mindset because of my brother and my sister. And that's probably where it comes from, is ensuring that they were going to be okay, and that I felt responsible for that. So I would say that that's probably where it really comes from.
Thank you for sharing that. Certainly, those experiences definitely shaped you
Yeah.
for the next stage of your life, which was the military. For those who don't know, Jason is still active duty in the Army, and he's a an Army Ranger. So something very admirable. His book goes into great detail of what it took to go through Ranger school and a lot of his experiences that continue to shape him today. So, if you don't mind me asking, Jason, Ranger School is often described as a sustained grind rather than a single defining event. What did that experience reveal about you that surprised you most?
Well, out the gate, that I wanted something more than I really thought I was capable of at the time. Uh, and that I was able to do things way beyond what was probably ever in my foreseeable future. You know, never in a million years, you know, what I thought I'd have been on the roster at Ranger School 5-12, right? Never. So it helped me see that, you know, and I kind of get into this with the book, but you know, life is full of sliding doors, and you know, I choose to jump through them and put everything that I have into it, and then come out the other side a whole different person. Realize that, you know, going through that, to your point, sustained grind, that I could in fact survive more than I've already survived.
Right. I see that experience and I sort of relate a little bit because Ranger School is one of the most challenging schools in militaries across the world. I went to the Marine Corps boot camp. It's definitely a scaled back version training, but I definitely can relate. And maybe you felt this way coming out on the other side, like Shawshank Redemption, coming out on the other side of the river of shit, and you finally are liberated in a sense. But even before Ranger School, fortunately, life gave you that opportunity. God gave you that opportunity of being helped by some great human beings,
Yeah,
you know, that helped you uh, get your act together, you know, and get into military academy. Correct?
correct. Yeah, you know, it's a bit of a long story, hence the book. But I was very fortunate to meet a woman who became essentially my surrogate mother, and she brought me in, took me in, and I knew right away that, you know, if I was going to do anything to escape this city, to be a better person, to be able to take care of, you know, my brothers and sisters, and be able to take care of family of my own, that I'm going to have to stand on somebody's shoulders, right? That's what we have to do. That's what we do as parents, as mentors, as teachers. this is what I think, human nature is. And when we give into that and accept that there are people out there that they're really meant to be in your lives, you can give in and you can stand on their shoulders, and they're happy to let you do that. And and the best thing you can do is deliver, right? Deliver on the promise that you know uh you made to them, right? I'm gonna stand on your shoulders, but I'm gonna do it right. So yeah, to that point, her uh, her guidance and her mentorship really shaped me, and she introduced me to a man who we affectionately called G. And he's a army, uh, at the time retired, just retired, army veteran, 22 years almost. And he really, yeah, L, that's her name, by the way. Yeah, 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 L. Um, she gave me the confidence that I needed to explore outside of the proverbial walls that I was talking about earlier.
Mhm.
And um, G, or Galarza, he's the man that helped shape my moral compass and uh, helped me really, really become the man that I am today. Uh, inside and out. He really became my surrogate father, if you will. In fact, he almost adopted me out of necessity for some of the situations that I was in Chicago. So yeah.
Okay. Going back to those experiences, as you said, you had to deliver, right? You had to demonstrate, and I think that helped you grow. And eventually, we'll get into how that shapes leadership. I want to save that for a little later, but I know that those early lessons in life definitely shaped how you execute leadership. And jumping back into Army Ranger School, how did prolonged exhaustion and deprivation reshape your understanding of leadership, especially when others depended on you?
For me, it helped shape my number one leadership principle. And what I realized is that in leadership is a choice. I mean, and in many cases, I say it's a choice because you can give up, right? I could have given up on my brothers and sisters. I could have given up on my mother, right? You can give up. But if you have chosen to be a leader, when you reach the end of your rope, you have no choice but to make more rope. That's your job. That's what you've signed up for. You don't get to quit. You don't get to, sit on your ass and say, well, I don't have any other options. Well, you have to create options. You have to create circumstances. You have to create more rope. That's your job, and that's what people are expecting of you. And I think that's really what I walked away with at Ranger School from
Mm.
that particular question. Yeah, that particular.
Which leadership lessons from Ranger School stayed with you for life, and which ones, if any, later you had to unlearn?
That's a great, yeah, that's a great question. You know, when I look at, again, my leadership principles, and I've already talked about rope, um, but I think that probably the number one thing that I learned and helped shape, my philosophy is failure, and the definition of failure and how we manage that in our own lives, and then in the people that we lead. I think, when I look at failure, I think, how do I allow my people to fail without becoming a failure? That's probably the most important thing for me. And this happened constantly at Ranger School, right? People are getting no goes all the time. Soldiers are getting major minuses and minor minuses, they call them, and almost getting kicked out. And nobody's there. Nobody's there, saying, today I'm gonna suck at life, and I'm gonna try to get kicked out of here. That's not what's
Mm.
happening, right? That's not what's happening. People, they're giving it their all, especially if they've made it down to, you're in swamp phase, and you've been there for a couple of months at this point or more because you've been recycled. Nobody's showing up and saying, I'm gonna make sure that everybody around me has a bad day. That's not what's happening there. So when people make mistakes and people, and soldiers are failing at something, how do we let them fail without becoming a failure? And that I think for me, what I learned is, you don't focus on the immediate outcomes, you focus on the effort and if we can focus on the effort, praise the effort because the effort was there, and the outcomes will eventually follow. If we focus immediately on the outcome and that outcome was failure, well, then you're going to have a failure of a soldier because that's what you've enabled and that's what you've caused to have. So I would say that that's probably the number one lesson that I walked away with, but also shaped my philosophy. I don't know that there's anything that I would unlearn. Yeah, I'd have to really put some thought into that.
Okay, we'll leave it for that for another
Yeah.
podcast. I'd like to move now into one of the most challenging parts of your life, as if Ranger School wasn't already very challenging. I recall in your book talking about going to flight school, and then I think that's where you found out that you had cancer. So when you received your cancer diagnosis while still serving, what was the first internal conversation you remember having with yourself?
To be honest, the first internal conversation I had with myself was I need to hide this from everybody, that this I have to be completely honest. Like that's really where I was at that time. I was like, this is impossible. I can't be sick. I was in the best shape of my life. And I was like, man, I felt embarrassed to tell people. I hid it from everybody for the longest time. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody.
You just
And
kept hard charging.
I did, yeah, exactly. I did. And I mean, in fact, you know, I, I passed a PT test. I even, you know, I was still cooking as hard as I can, which didn't help me, obviously. In hindsight, that was a very bad idea. Um, you know, but I was afraid. That's probably the first time that I was afraid I was going to be defeated by something.
Wow. Wow.
And I was really, really afraid to have that conversation with anybody. And I don't, it was a very different feeling for me because I was so used to attacking everything that I could possibly attack head on, and I would overcome. And I didn't need anybody. When I was, like I need, I had my mentors, and but I didn't need doctors. I didn't need, and it just kind of, you know, it,
You do like the Marines. You improvise, adapt, and overcome no
yeah,
matter what the situation,
yeah.
right?
And that was, I mean, and that's, again, hindsight, it was not a good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was probably the first thing was, hey, I need to be able to do this on my, I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want people to think differently of me. I didn't want people to, I didn't want any of the stigmas. I didn't want anybody to look at me like I was weak, or incapable or any of that. So I kept it to myself for a while.
So, how did facing serious illness in uniform change the way you understood vulnerability, identity, and leadership?
So that's, as I, uh, came out of that phase of, trying to keep it to myself and fight it by myself. Uh, you know, I did eventually, you know, after spending some serious time with my mentors and talking through this, I did eventually open up and, let everybody know, what was going on, and, what I needed in terms of time and space and support. Uh, and it was challenging for me because I wasn't that person to say, I wasn't one to vocalize and say, I need help from you, or can you do this for me? That wasn't part of my everyday vocabulary by any means at that time. It really helped me, at that time, reshape the way, I allowed people in my life. I allowed people to get close. That's definitely something that I struggled with. I didn't really allow people to get close to me just because of the way I grew up. Uh, at that point, I mean, really, I had Yael, and I had Galarza, and I had my brothers and sisters, and that's it. Like, I didn't have anybody else that was really close to me that I would allow, you know, within striking distance, if you will. So, um, I had to allow other people in, and I had to allow other people to get close enough to me to hurt me in order to survive that period. And that ranged from everybody from my commander at the time to some couple of my platoon sergeant at the time. I eventually started to lean on everyone that I could possibly lean on in order to move forward and survive this damn thing.
Right. So I think that probably was a precursor to learning how to be a great program manager, which you are, because quite often we see that program managers do struggle with delegating
Yeah.
and leaning on others for support. And that's why the support system exists. Folks like myself exist.
Hmm.
And so I remember back in Kansas City, you heavily relied on someone like me for a full rebaseline of a $1 billion program. And you couldn't do it all yourself. Yeah, you had the technical expertise, the insight, and knew the team very well, but you also needed to rely on your engineers, your support staff. Life has a way of just evolving and shaping you into something that
Yeah,
you will later need, right?
absolutely.
What was it like balancing mission or responsibility and personal survival at the same time? That must have been very, very challenging.
It was challenging, and I realized, now that um, so I wasn't going to be able to help anybody do anything, whether it was the mission or another soldier for that matter, and if I wasn't capable of taking care of myself. And as men, I think we struggle with self care. We struggle with taking care of. I struggle now. My wife can tell you I struggle immensely. But that's probably the number one thing that we need to be doing is self care. And at that time, you know, this goes back to the delegation piece and so forth, right? I mean, there are so many other capable, soldiers. I could lean on to do the things that needed to be done, and other and other aspects of my life that I could take a tactical pause and spend some time taking care of myself in order to recover and become my best self again. And that
Right.
was hard. It was very hard to do, but necessary. I learned that that was kind of to your point. How do I step back and enable everyone else around me to do these things because they are capable, and it's also a teachable moment for everybody, myself included. But it was tough. It was definitely tough.
I'm very happy that you have fully recovered. You've been in remission for how long now?
Well, I see, 2013, I guess 10 years now. So,
Wow. That
well,
that is amazing. You take us in your book through even post cancer, just choices, life choices that you make. And one of those that was just an amazing adventure to read is you going through the ice age trails and going through that mental and physical sacrifice to further understand yourself and further develop as a human being as you take us through learning to suffer. You did learn to suffer even more so post cancer, correct?
I used that. I mean, the Ice Age Trail was necessary for me to heal my soul. And it was also necessary for me to remind my entire body, my soul, my mind, my energy that I was capable of doing these things, being the person that I was, despite having come through 2 years of chemo and transplants and radiation and all that junk. I was in some ways a little bit lost to. And I used the Ice Age Trail to put those, I'd say the past behind me, literally and figuratively, one step at a time, and give me an opportunity to you know, regain control of my body, regain control of my mind, and dial in and focus and try to figure out what were the next steps going to be in my life after this experience.
That was an insightful part of your book, and I truly appreciate you just giving us that so we can learn, see how we can often face difficult challenges in our life, move forward, leading the way, as they say with the
Yeah.
Rangers, right?
Mm.
And just continue. Don't let any other setback derail you. Just
Yeah.
continue moving forward, right? And so at this point, I want to transition a little bit more into. Thanks again for sharing that, by the
Yeah.
way. I want to move forward and transition into Department of Defense and Nuclear Weapons Program. When you transition from the military leadership into high stakes national security programs, what translated cleanly and what didn't?
Uh, you know, cleanly, clean transition was pretty straightforward in terms of supporting a mission set that was near and dear to my heart as an American, as a you know a service member supporting the warfighter. And those values transitioned very easy, and I found I found the work to be um, not 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 so I don't know how to say it. Not labor intensive or a grind that sucked or any of that. I found it to be invigorating, and I found it to be something that I enjoyed doing daily, and it was very easy to wake up and go and do. Very similar to how it was, you know, putting on the uniform and standing tall in front of the formation. Um, so that part was easy. Uh, the hard part was definitely you know the absolute spread of the number of different personalities and and the merge between civilian mindset and military mindset. As a commander, right? You know people can your people, and this is my philosophy. My people can opinionate, and they can comment, and they can say as much as they want to say, all the way up until a command decision is made. And then when a command decision is made, you execute. You go. That wasn't the case, right? In the civilian world, it's like you make a decision, and then still everybody wants to fight it, and it's like, and then we end up 2 or 3 weeks downstream from this decision, and we come back to the original point that I was making, and it's like, yeah, well, we probably should have just done it in the first place. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, but it's difficult because, especially when you've got a whole bunch of brilliant scientists and engineers, and everybody's got something to say. It's not a command structure philosophy, right? It's not it's definitely nuanced, more nuanced environment that you have to convince people to trust and believe, that you're making the right decisions based on what needs to happen technically, programmatically, and so forth.
So different personalities, different generations, different ideologies.
Yeah,
And what makes a great program manager is being able to bring all those different styles together cohesively and still run similarly to a military unit
yeah,
without the rigor, that goes on in a military unit, but still being able to perform. Everybody does their part. And as long as we do that, we can accomplish the mission, right?
yeah. And that, again, when I first transitioned, those were the difficulties. I certainly, you know, that blend, that merge now is pretty seamless in terms of getting it, to your point, leaning on all the resources, enabling people to do what it is that they exist to do, and coming out on the other side successful because, again, same team, same fight.
Right. Jason, working in national defense programs, how do you help teams understand the seriousness of the mission without allowing fear to paralyze decision making?
It's interesting, especially for new, I'd say seasoned, folks that are seasoned in the industry. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to work with those folks, but trying to get, you know, trying to onboard, new engineers and new folks out of college and young people that are coming in, to work the floor or even internships and so forth. Uh, you get all those questions about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And, I always start with the warfighter. I always try to explain, you know, that somewhere downrange, there's a warfighter in the dirt that you're supporting. That's number one. But I actually try to get folks to understand, that everything that we're doing is only relevant if diplomacy fails. And we are the backup plan, right? Diplomacy is always first. And in the event that diplomacy fails, then what we're doing is what's going to ensure the survivability of our nation and our families and our backyards, keeping the war out of our backyards, if you will. So I try to go down that path to help folks understand, you know, what you know how the big picture works.
Oh, and that goes into my next question. When failure has national consequences, how do you personally define accountability as a leader and ensuring that everybody does their part, everyone is accountable and does the right thing, even when not being watched?
Yeah, and I think that, for the most part, folks that come into the industry, especially, after you know really getting a chance to understand the why, understand the purpose of what it is that we're doing, it generally generally clicks for those folks. But on occasion, and I'll be honest, I haven't run into a great many people that didn't really understand the consequences of not performing. But on occasion, right, you do have that. There's always that one person that um, is pulling their weight or doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're cutting corners and so forth. The fact of the matter is you have to hold the standard for everybody, and and unfortunately, you have to call it in front of, and you have to call it live. And for me, I always ask the question first. I say, look, are you comfortable with me giving you some feedback right now? And that opens up the conversation, kind of helps them drop the barrier a little bit. And I try to explain, again, uh, you know, at some point downrange, you know, there's a warfighter that's relying on you to do this right. And especially if they're not a service member, or they've never done, any kind of, overseas work, whether it's Peace Corps or anything like that. Try to help shape a little bit of that mindset for what it's like to be downrange, what it's like to be away from your families, and have to rely on these tools that we're building, right? Rely on these communication systems, these radars, these Blue Force trackers, whatever it is that we're making at that time. That is their survivability to get back to their family. It takes hold. It always takes hold, I would say.
Oh, so, what do you see as being one of the greatest challenges in national defense and defense contracting as we move forward into this world of volatility? As we know, conflicts can erupt anywhere at a moment's notice across the globe. And what do you foresee as being the biggest challenge for us, for example, expediting procurement and manufacturing of any artifact that is needed? We're taking just too long. And from a program manager's perspective, what do you see as being the biggest challenge today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of that I would point out, right away. I think your first point is definitely the supply chain, and the very it's a very challenging time to be in, in terms of the safety and surety of the components that we're not only are we making, but also we're procuring COTS or commercial off the shelf parts in order to make something, and that those are in fact going to one, they're not going to compromise our systems technologically because they have some hidden technology in there to subvert what we're doing, right? There's a lot of pieces of technology out there that can compromise your system if you're not careful. But the supply chain and the shortage in components and the long lead time that it takes to get certain things that we need to make what we need is a huge challenge. Now, you compound that with the tariffs that we're facing right now, which is, you can argue both sides of the tariff piece, but it certainly has an impact on everybody's bottom line. But that's not probably the big, I don't you don't need to focus on the tariffs for that matter. But I would say probably more challenging is the skill gap, jobs available versus skills available in people and young people coming out, right? We have a major gap in manufacturing roles and who's filling those roles. In some cases, I was underspent by considerable considerable amount of money because there was a significant gap in available resources to build what we needed to build. And then, I would say the third thing that's challenging is young people being able to get a security clearance, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to college and they're drinking and they're driving and they're doing all kinds of drugs and they're doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they come out and they graduate and they got a brilliant mind, but they can't get a freaking security clearance because they did a bunch of stupid shit that they shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
it. So
Stay clean, guys.
yeah.
Folks, I want to talk a little bit more about your book. What compelled you to write this book instead of keeping those experiences private?
Um, well, you know, my mentors encouraged me. Uh, so let me actually back up a little bit more. So, uh, in terms of healing, right? A lot of you know, despite everything that I've been through and everything that I've overcome, there was still a lot of damage, right? And remember, I said earlier that I had a hard time allowing people close to me. That was one outcome of the way I grew up. Another outcome that I had, which I'll say was a major character flaw, is I had a very serious lack of empathy for pretty much anyone and anything. Like I could give two F's that you were having a bad day because you have no idea what a bad day is, you know?
Yeah.
But in reality, everybody's fighting a different battle in some way. And I had to learn that the hard way. So from a healing perspective, I tried all kinds of different things, but nothing was more cathartic than putting pen to pad, which started actually on the Ice Age Trail when I was walking. I was really taking a lot of notes and a lot of going through my memories and going through all of the things that I had been through and putting it on paper and trying to, again, sort of redirect my soul on a path that I think was going to be good for me. And I didn't, and again, those thoughts were there, but I didn't actually decide to write until I met Johnny Blue Hands on the train. Uh,
That's
yeah,
right. I do
yeah,
remember reading
yeah. So
him.
that guy really, we sat and talked for 8 hours, and that guy convinced me to, really put it in high gear and get after it. Yeah.
Right. Which part of the book was the hardest to write? Not because it was painful, but because it demanded the most honesty.
I was probably definitely the Chicago history with my mom and my family. I knew that some parts of that book was going to hurt. Was going to hurt my mom. Was going to hurt my pop. Was going to hurt my sister. Because we kind of grew up with this mentality: you don't do your dirty laundry in public. Yeah,
Yeah.
all right.
Keep it private.
Yeah, you take care of your family. You do what you do, and that's that. Uh, But, I had spent some serious time, talking with my brothers, talking with my sister, talking with everybody, letting everybody know these were the things that were gonna happen. And in fact, I tried to get as much, my mom had already passed at this point, when I was really getting into, I was getting close to publishing, but my pop, he hadn't, and I said, I'm gonna go ask him some questions, to see what maybe I could glean from his mindset and circumstances at that time. And never before had I seen him so impacted by a simple question of, you know, tell me what the circumstances were. And I mean, I could see immediately the very distraught remorse, regret, all of it kind of take root in a single moment. And I remember my sister asking me to maybe not ask those questions anymore. Just like you already know what you already know. Let's just move forward. So yeah, definitely that period, which was essentially the second chapter in the book. It's probably the most challenging.
Now, I imagine that after having those difficult conversations, not only was it healing for you, but also for him, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think our relationship got better. I think that he became a little more open. Um, he actually became a little more involved. Um, he's visited Kansas City a couple of times now, a few times now from Chicago. Despite some of the difficulties he has, in his mobility. Um, so I would say, you know, it definitely opened up some pathways, to have a better relationship.
So we've had this conversation and I've healed in sort of different ways, but you've also encouraged me to put my experiences into, paper and pen and start writing my own. And who knows, in the future, I see it, my kids are encouraging me and I have a different story to tell, but nonetheless, it's filled with challenges and overcoming, being resilient, and just moving forward. That that strong mentality that
Yeah,
you're shaped with, whether you got it from your family or from the military, life experiences. Everybody can learn from our stories, and I certainly appreciated yours. But I'd like to ask, if a reader walks away with one lesson from the book, what do you hope it is?
I'd say the number one thing that I would ask people to walk away with is that you really are in control of your circumstances, and by that I mean you can generate circumstance. You can take everything that's happening around you and make a decision to do something different. Because if you want to generate new circumstances, you have to do something different and way outside of your comfort zone. You have to. If that means moving across the country by yourself, that means taking your family across the country like you did, right? If you have to do something different in order to generate new circumstances. So if you don't like what's happening, then do something about it. It's that simple. And you are the feeling in the mind that generates new circumstances. You have to be able to hit the cliff. If you're at the precipice of destruction, do something that's unique, do something different, do something wild, way outside your comfort zone, jump through the sliding doors and move forward.
Yeah, I remember having a couple of different conversations with you. One was my first and only director role that I was about to take a few years ago. I was a little hesitant, and you were very encouraging. You were like, "Do it. Get out of that comfort zone. It might be a little different from what you've done, but you will learn a
Yeah.
lot, and your growth will be exponential." And sure enough, that eventually led to me starting my own company, which I took inspiration from you as well, because for those who don't know, Jason is basically a serial entrepreneur. He not only is an Army Ranger, a program manager in defense programs, but he has a cigar and jazz lounge. He's mentioned to me in the past about some great opportunities that are coming up. I think you're in real estate as well. And you also have a leadership company. You consult in leadership, and I truly appreciate all the advice you've given me throughout the years. And I'd like to ask, how has suffering reshaped the way that you lead people who may be struggling quietly or invisibly?
Well, I like to think first, I guess I'd separate, I try to help people understand the difference between adversity and suffering, right? And, every time I ask somebody what the difference is, I mean, you get a number of different answers. And my answer, I'll give it to you now. Adversity, you get a chance to pull your bootstraps up, overcome. You get a chance to find tools and techniques and overcome obstacles and so forth. Suffering, you have no choice but to endure, period. And you can choose to endure or you can choose to give up. And when I engage with people that are suffering, the probably the first thing and the number one most important thing you can do is just show up, be a presence. You don't have to be judgmental, you don't have to offer advice, you don't have to say, well, you can do this, you can do that. Just sit with them. And at some point they open up and begin to engage with you. And what I've learned over time though is that everybody, again, we talked about this before, is fighting a different battle, and this goes back to my lack of empathy when in my early years. And so I've really learned to uh, listen to people, really, really learn to understand their issues, their problems as real problems, which is what I really struggled with in the past. No matter what level or caliber the issue was, it could be totally benign compared to something you and I might be going through. But to them, psychologically, it's very, very challenging. It's very, very difficult just because of their life experiences. So my job is to look at them and recognize that as a very real moment for them that's shaping their life. And again, just show up, be a presence. And that has always broken the ice for me to be able to engage and build a relationship and build some trust and eventually have an opportunity for them to say, well, what would you do in this situation? And that takes a long time for somebody to be able to ask that question. Like it took me a very long time
Yeah.
to open up and let people in.
Well, yeah, being very empathetic is critical because, as you said, everybody is shaped differently. Everybody has different life experiences, and learning to support folks in whatever situation they may be going through, we have to show that support so they bloom.
People aren't People don't just wake up and again say, you know what, I'm gonna make sure everybody around me has a bad day. You know, like if something's going on, if something's wrong, or somebody's acting, a little rude or whatever, there's usually a deeper, yeah,
There's a reason.
there's something going on that's driving that. And I remember the guy with uh, uh, I don't know if I ever told you that story. I know it's in the book, but the guy they kept stealing his string cheese out of the fridge at the office, and yeah, yeah, it's like, dude, like, who cares about your string cheese? I don't care, like, why, but um, at the end of the day, it's not about the string cheese. It was that, you know, he felt undervalued. Like he felt like nobody cared about him, right? And that's the
Yeah, and it struck a nerve, struck a chord, right, with him.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have to look past that superficial situation that's unfolding right in front of you and try to dig a little bit deeper to understand what's driving that person that day, you know?
Jason, I know that you're a busy guy, so I have a few more questions that I do want to ask. And where does faith intersect with leadership for you? Not as a doctrine, but as lived experience under pressure.
Well, that's always been a tough line for us. Growing up in Chicago, we grew up very much without the church. We did not grow up, without any, biblical presence, none of that. It wasn't until I, was introduced to, Yael and Galarza before we really, my, me really started to see and be introduced. And at that time, it was largely Episcopalian, just by nature of who I was around. And then, you know, as I engaged more with the military and I got to meet a lot more people and be able to understand different faiths and of course my wife's family's Catholic, and so it all started to merge. I look back now and there are some things, and this comes back to circumstance, right? There are some things that are in your control and some things that aren't in your control. Uh, when I when I look, I try to think, how do I trust the timeline of my life and just let things happen the way that they're supposed to happen? We talk about generating circumstances and we talk about, you know, doing things that are outside of your comfort zone and so forth. But at some point, you also, when it comes time, if a sliding door is opening in front of you, then, you know, that's your chance to take a leap of faith and trust that there's something good on the other side of it for you. Uh, and I do my best to lean that direction as often as I can.
Um, One of the last questions I have for you here today is brotherhood has shown up repeatedly in your life, from ranger school to professional teams to lifelong friendships. What does true brotherhood require when things get hard?
It kind of comes right back to what we just talked about. I think it's showing up. I think that there's a level of trust there that goes beyond what most would consider everyday run of the mill acquaintances. Uh, I think that you know f- from a brotherhood perspective, I know without a doubt that Nayeli could call you if she needed something. Wouldn't even have to think twice on it.
Not at all. Not at all.
So that presence, that ability to be present, to show up, whether it's virtual phone, whatever it might be, that is what I think is probably the most important piece.
And be there. I remember just like it was yesterday, unfortunately, when your mom passed away and you
Yeah,
called me
I was struck by that. Yeah,
and we had that very difficult conversation because you were emotionally distraught. And I just had to be that shoulder for you, man. That's true love. And
yeah,
so being there for those in need. We both lead very busy lives and we can go on 6 months, a year without talking. But I know that when we do have that sit down, that chat, whether on the phone or video, great conversations, and we can be honest with each other and be supportive of one another.
absolutely, bro. Absolutely.
Jason, I'll ask the last question, and this is a legacy and reflection question. When you're older and looking back on your life and career, what do you hope your children and the people you've led understand about how you've lived, led, and suffered?
That's a hell of a question, Carlo. I think I would hope that my children, that my family, people that knew me would know right away that I wasn't afraid to do the hard things. I wasn't afraid to make the hard choices. I wasn't one to take the path of least resistance. I was intentional about breaking generational curses and very intentional and very consciously aware of sacrificing everything that I could possibly sacrifice to make my family better in every way possible before I leave this earth.
Oh, it's truly profound. And I want to thank you for being my brother, being my friend from the moment that we met. At first, when we sat down in that war room, I remember in Kansas City, I saw you with Chicago Cubs lanyard, and I was like, "Oh, we got a Cubs fan." He had just won the World Series, hadn't beaten the Dodgers in the playoffs, and I
Yeah,
was like, "I don't know if I'm going to like this guy," but in the end, here we are. We're having great conversations over the years, and truly this is one for the ages, I think. And I'm very excited to hear about your future projects, what you have going on, staying in touch with you and hearing about your family growing. That's amazing. As I mentioned earlier, you have a uh, cigar and jazz lounge
Mm.
in Kansas City. Do you mind sharing some details about that?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. My wife and I decided to, um, well, we needed an office, right? That's really where it came from is we needed somewhere to work independently from home because our children were getting so big, they kept finding us. We have a really nice office in the back of the house, but they're getting big and they're knocking and opening windows and finding us. And so it was hard to focus and stay concentrated. And we were on the verge of buying another residential rental property and we said, look, let's just go with the commercial property. I love cigars. Despite my history, I enjoy a good cigar every now and again. And, we said, look, we can office out of here. I can coach out of here. I can mentor out of here. I can conduct all the other businesses that we have out of here. And with our love for music and live music, we decided to open this place so that we could use it as sort of a bedrock for everything else that we're launching, and it's fabulous. We do live music almost every night of the week, and we are a 24-hour lounge for our members. And you know, we say Sherry's Executive Lounge. We named it Sherry's because it's after my mother. She was the kind of she smoked everything there was to smoke, as you can imagine. We say executive lounge because I like to say, look, when you smoke a cigar, when I'm sitting down to smoke a cigar, I'm sitting down to have an executive session with my soul. And that's what cigars are meant to do. They're meant to bring people together. They're meant to slow you down. They're meant to, you're not fiending, I don't have a cigar for a weeks on end. I'm not fiending for a cigar. It's an experience that you sit down and enjoy and have meaningful conversations with people. And from a our members, again, Sherry's Executive Lounge, these are local Kansas City CEOs. We've got federal judges. We've got all kinds of people in here that come from every walk of life that can share experiences and do the things that they need to do here. $1 million deals have been struck on these tables, and continue to happen. So that's what we envisioned, and that's what we created, and that's what we really love about this place.
Oh, that's great. So Sherry's cigar and jazz lounge in Kansas City, and you can easily Google that and find it. So whereabouts in Kansas City?
So we're in the city itself. We're in what's called the West 39th Street district, basically the West 39th Street Food and Entertainment District near state line. So we're right on the border, actually, of Missouri and Kansas in Kansas City. So can't miss it. Yeah.
Great. And aside from that, again, you have your leadership consulting firm, and you've shared with me in the past. You even coach MBA students, and mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, first of all, the lounge is closed during the day. So, like, this is where Natalie and I office out of. So, this is where I work remotely for uninterrupted. For everything else that's going on, especially with my program management responsibilities. Um, and then, we have a full set of staff that work here. Uh, in the evenings when we go home. But yeah, the consulting, I coach UMKC, the MBA students at UMKC here, the University of Missouri Kansas City, and then I do a lot of private. I get a lot of just requests from folks that are people that are growing into new roles, or they have difficulty approaching difficult employees or whatever the case might be. So, and I do a lot of that mentoring out of here as well, and that's been going very well here.
Oh, that's great. I know you have other businesses, including your wife. I think she
Yeah,
already wrote her book, right?
yeah, she's in. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting close.
Okay, all
Right.
right.
She owns the Casey Candle Company, which is growing pretty significantly. Which her candles are carried across Kansas City right now. A lot of road shows, a lot of local businesses and whatnot carry her candles, which is pretty neat. And then she does all the real estate side of things as well.
Wow. Well, great, man. Again, I want to thank you, Jason, for sitting with me and sharing a great part of your life. I truly admire you. My family does too. I know my daughter, Gabriella, does admire you very much. She was looking forward to this podcast when she heard, that we were going to sit down and have this chat. I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear it. As a matter of fact, I can't find my copy, but I grabbed her copy that you personally signed for her. I often share your story, the book, with others. There's a great brother of mine from church who's also an Army Ranger, and I mentioned to him that you have a great book about resilience and learning to suffer. Again, thank you very much, my brother. I look
Yes, sir.
forward to seeing you in the future and wish you nothing but great continuous success in everything that you do. You're a great inspiration, and I continue to pray for you, brother.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate you, brother. It's really good to see you. And thank you for having me on this show. I look forward to sharing it with everybody on our side of the house.
Thanks again. You have a wonderful day.
You too, brother. My best to the family.
Thank you. Bye bye.